Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the nice introduction. And I'm very pleased to be among such great specialists in armor because I myself am not. I have just started 1 year ago, and armor is just a part of my dissertation. And I'm happy to present something and hear what you think about it from a specialist point of view. Puzzlingly, one of the copperplate engravings in the anatomical treatise Historia de la Composición del Cuerpo Humano, published by Juan Valverde de Amusco in 1556, depicts two a la antica cuirasses arranged as trophies with opened abdominal cavities showing the stomach, intestines, and mesentery as if the armors themselves were dissected bodies. The 42 illustrations of the book, most probably drawn by Gaspar Beckera and engraved by Nicolas Beatrizet, reproduce all but 4 iconographical models invented by Andreas Vesalius's pioneering De Humani Corporis Fabrica from 1543. Valverde greatly admired Vesalius's achievement, praising in particular the anatomical woodcuts, which, as he explains in the address to the reader, quote, are so well done it would look like envy or malignity not to take advantage of them, end quote. The idiosyncrasy of the dissected armors, therefore, is all the more remarkable. Contrary to interpretations that assign Valverde's deviation to a mannerist sense of play, or a counter-reformatory morbidity, however, I suggest they signal a fundamental change in the conceptualization of the body that is at once anatomical, ethical, and political. In general terms, copperplate engraving, first adopted for anatomical imagery by Valverde, introduced a crisp sharpness of contours at odds with the soft lining of woodcuts, thus suggesting the metalloid character of armor. What is more, the layout of the images reveals a blending of formal features, associating armor and anatomy intrinsically. While both ensembles display muscled breastplates prepared for inspection, iconographic peculiarities seem to account for anatomical properties detailed in the explanatory side illustrations. The upper piece, for instance, features a square neck opening with shoulder straps and high-relief pauldrons shaped as moustached lion heads from which short sleeves emanate. The exposed inside of the right sleeve in this way seems to allude to the ligated duodenum turned frontally towards the viewer. This piece here. Furthermore, the course of the large intestinal tube traces the horizontal line of the armor's neck opening, with the cecum bent downwards diagonally, similar to the gaping lion heads. The lower cuirass, in contrast, is fashioned with a round neckline, tapered downwards by the breast, overlapping shoulder strips, as well as slightly longer sleeves with foliate rims. The upper curving line of the torso, in this case, reprises the border of the mesentery, extracted from the posterior wall of the abdominal cavity and turned upside so as to display the recessing junction of the intestinal tract. So this part is this part, and the letter K appears here. What I'm saying is that it reprises this kind of shape. The membranous tissue hanging down at the right side not only reiterates the foliate sleeves of the armor, but also echoes the venation of leaves. In these engravings, the formal analogy of armor and anatomy is articulated to such an extreme as to suggest a mutual elucidation rather than a faithful reproduction of the latter framed by the former. Compared to Vesalius's illustration of the abdomen, which we see on the left, transplanted into fragmentary antique sculpture, so as to moderate the taboo of dissection, the cuirasses transcend rhetorical considerations, but themselves prefigure formal decisions, and, as a result, conclusions drawn from these images as to the functioning of the human body. Most strikingly, though, Valverde chose to depict a specific type of armor actually produced at the time and worn by the most illustrious princes in ceremonial occasions such as tournaments, triumphal entries, and state receptions. Unlike antique sculpture, which served as a paradigm for visual representation, these armors evoke a prosthetic transformation rather than a redoubling of the wearer. In fact, they designate a conceptual turn in medical practice that no longer strove for the restoration of a natural condition, but instead a cosmetic perfection of the body. Oscillating between body, armor, and image, Valverde's enigmatic figure accordingly highlights the entanglement of medical and political discourses, as well as the transformative power invested in objects of art. In more general terms, it indicates a plastic notion of identity that feeds as much from the individual body and its social persona as from the objects associated with it. Poised between representation and physical correction, I will argue, these armors point to a political anatomy evolving around the body of the sovereign. While the sculptural iconography adopted by Vesalius aims at a physiological or analytical reconstruction of the body, Valverde's armor torsos suggest a shift in anatomical thinking in favor of body functions, fluids, and metabolism, introduced by his teacher, the Italian anatomist and surgeon Rialdo Colombo. Unlike Vesalius, Colombo embraced a holistic approach, embracing the working of the body, emphasizing the working of the body, rather than its structural composition and statics. In order to explore the circulation of the cardiovascular system, he infamously practiced vivisection, conducting experiments on living animals. Much more intuitively than sculpture, therefore, armor suggested a living body, whose vital functions Valverde sought to demonstrate. Conversely, however, the ever closer grasp of the living organism necessarily intensified the religious and social taboos associated with the physical violation of corpses. The grotesque interior of the body, in particular, challenged the integrity of the individual, imagined, as Mikhail Bakhtin contends, as, quote, strictly limited, impenetrable facade, end quote. Armor served as a means of visually reassembling the fragmented body, just as much as it itself is composed of a multitude of individual components. What is more, the anatomical dissection of the body by progressively removing layers of tissue and flesh finds a speaking analogy in the metalworking technique of intaglio, that is, the engraving of arms by chiseling, which had purportedly been reinvented by the Milan workshop of Filippo Nigoli. Armor, in general, adopted a formal unity supposed to mirror the organic constitution of the body. Replacing the composite suits of the late Middle Ages, compiled of angular iron plates and decorative appliques, the plates themselves were embossed into plastic expressive shapes, becoming anatomically enhanced embodiments of their wearers. Armor thus asserted a sense of meaning invested in the composition of the body by the political and ethical setting, while at the same time echoing back anatomical knowledge. Bartolomeo Campi's famous Alla Romana ensemble for Guidobaldo II della Rovere, Duke of Urbino, stands out as one of the most striking attempts at materializing anatomical norms in functional armor. Dated to 1546, it was most probably manufactured on the occasion of Guidobaldo's appointment as governor of the Venetian armies. Similar to Valverde's enigmatic engraving, the suit consists of a blackened muscle cuirass with simulated square neck opening and articulate pauldrons, fashioned as gaping, moustached lion heads, with Damascene crowns of leaves. This part, here are the leaves. Under two overlapping waist plates, here and here, which additionally contour the rectus abdominis muscles, pteryges with appliques of gilt brass spread, showing emblems and monograms of the owner. This section. The center of the breastplate is decorated with a winged gorgon head from which acanthus scrolls shoot, tracing the pectorals and terminating in the nipples. The richly Damascene burgonet with a delicate gilt brass oak wreath and the open-work steel sandals, imitating Roman models, complete the outfit. Evoking bronze sculpture, the abdomen is modeled with intense anatomical detail, accentuated both by the reflecting finish and the elaborate appliques that lend almost graphical sharpness to individual muscle strands. Poised between flesh and steel, the anatomy is pronounced to such an extreme as to indicate tension and potential of immediate action. Apart from monograms and heraldic insignia that both identify the owner and personalize the object, the ensemble does not provide any iconographic program. Instead, accessories and decorum are unambiguously subordinated to the muscle cuirass, framing, adorning, and exhibiting it as if it was a relic bestowed with magical powers. The muscular torso is characterized as both content and aim of the display, thus relegating symbolical meaning to anatomy itself. The structural ambiguity of body and armor, indicated above, points to the anthropological dimension of material culture, conceptualizing objects not as media of visual representation, but rather as extensions of the body, partaking actively in its organic constitution. While the staging of physical power seems to imply a unidirectional hierarchy of power, exerted by the absent ruler on the awed subject, armor points to more ambiguous sources of power, transforming the subject only inasmuch as the ruler himself is transformed. Images and objects, effigies as much as armor, mirrored back to the ones represented, ideal renderings of themselves, requiring them to conform. In contrast to portraiture or political allegories, though, which might have worked as a stimulus to continuous ethical self-perfection, armor administered physical and anatomical force, thus literally shaping the ruler's body. The stylistic conventions of this aesthetic mutation derived from humanist ethical discourse that, according to the principle of mens sana in corpore sano, tied moral to anatomical features, both anchored in the antique norms of proportionality and adequacy. The body was conceived of as a dynamic force field, both expressing and shaping inner dispositions, even so as to suggest a moral perfection of the soul through treatment of the body. The allegorical impetus of this argument, elaborated, for example, by Marsilio Ficino, however, in the 16th century adopted distinctly medical connotations and became part of the political imagery of the body, precipitated above all by the arts. While Ficino, in his commentary on Plato's Symposion, pertained that, quote, "It is an internal perfection which produces the external," end quote, in Baldassare Castiglione's account of the self-cultivated courtier, beauty does not follow from a moral disposition, but instead is skillfully manufactured so as to evoke the latter. Ever more prominently, too, the physical constitution figured in the genre of Mirror of Princes, presented rulers as guides for political and moral behavior. The German humanist and theologian Jakob Wimpfeling, for instance, in his Agatharchia from 1498, recommended a government of self, a regimen sui ipsius, which would enable the ruler to a quasi-magical correction of his subjects. Varying Plato, who envisioned an ideal citizen, educated and shaped by the state, in Wimpfeling's rendering, the prince is required to act as exemplum of virtue, so as to shape and term his subjects. Similarly, the post-reformatory theologian Wolfgang Seil devised his mirror as a health guide, attributing the well-being of the community to the sanity of the prince. In this intellectual environment, Valverde himself, based on his experience as a practitioner, had published a book on physical and mental health when working as a prosector to Realdo Colombo in Rome. His De Animi et Corporis Sanitate Tuenda from 1552 is dedicated to the papal legate of France, Cardinal Girolamo Verallo, and sketches guidelines for the hygiene, diet, and behavior of nobles. This regimen sanitatis, met with a medical reappraisal of cosmetics and the birth of plastic surgery, advocated foremost by the Paduan physicians Gabriele Falloppio and Girolamo Mercuriale. The therapeutic use of anatomical knowledge, as a result, amalgamated with ethical precepts into cosmetic norms when retranslated into courtly medical literature. Even more immediate, however, than in Mirrors of Princes and courtesy books, the correcting power exerted on the ruler emerges in humanist educational treatises. Taking advantage of the docility of the child, the teacher is advised to instruct both the mind and the body, administering on the one hand humanist learning and religious edification, on the other physical exercise and self-control. In his classical tractate De Ingenuis Moribus et Liberalibus Adolescentiae Studiis from 1402, for instance, the Italian humanist and statesman Pietro Paolo Vergerio suggested that adolescents should regularly look into mirrors because, quote, "Those who had a fine appearance would not dishonor it with vices, while those whose appearance was more irregular would take care to make themselves attractive through their virtues," end quote. In analogy to historical, mythical, and biblical exemplar, he argued, the apprehension of the living effigy of themselves would yield a disciplinary effect. Tellingly, he recommends the handling of arms and armor, quote, "as soon as age will permit," quote, end quote, referring in particular to the Spartans who allegedly used their weapons, quote, "as though they were parts of their body, like limbs or clothing," end quote. The humanist Enea Silvio Piccolomini, future Pope Pius II, in his De Liberorum Educatione from 1450, transposed the general demand for physical fitness and military prowess into distinctly aesthetic norms, insisting on decorum for the body, behavior, and clothing. He drew on a rhetorical concept which only a decade before had been adopted for the visual arts by Leon Battista Alberti. The prince was expected to conform to the precepts of rectitude, regularity, and proportion, while at the same time moderating and stylizing his movements. In order to acquire the projected median body, Piccolomini admonished his students to strive, quote, that your expression is regular, that you do not twist your lips nor suck on your tongue. Don't throw your head back or keep your eyes on the ground. Don't bend your neck to either side. Don't spread your hands. The motions of your eyelids must be properly restrained. Your arms should be straight, your gait firm and sure, end quote. What is more, he ascribes to clothing both a disciplinary and orthopedic effect. Criticizing indulgence in education, he urges to avoid soft linen and dresses, given that coarse materials would, quote, make the limbs tougher and more able to endure labor, end quote. On this account, armor figures as ideal embodiment of ethical, anatomical, and behavioral precepts. It both represented and physically implemented a humanist educational agenda. Most clearly, the rectifying and regularizing effect of armor on the body is documented by its contemporaneous use in orthopedic treatment. Put to the correction of musculoskeletal deformities, for instance, the Alsatian barber surgeon Hans von Gerstorff in his Feldbuch der Wundarznei from 1517 suggests the use of cuisses and plated arm guards clamped by braces to stretch crooked legs and arms. The accompanying woodcuts by Johann Ulrich Wechtlin show the devices being operated by hands that emerged from clouds as if the recovery was procured miraculously. The German ophthalmologist Georg Bartisch, court physician to the Elector of Saxony Augustus, in turn designed elaborate face masks to correct the muscular coordination of the eyes, which he termed, in accordance with German armor nomenclature, Sturmhut, a burgonet. Relating to the direction of the extraocular misalignment, the mask aim at counteracting either the converging or diverging gaze. In the same way that visors limit the sight of the wearer, these masks exploit holes and slits to condition the movement of the eyes. Cuirasses, too, could be put to orthopedic use. The notorious barber surgeon Ambroise Paré, personal physician to the French kings, for example, advised the use of steel corselets to rectify the spine in cases of scoliosis. Applied to modulate spinal growth in infancy and adolescence, these devices reveal striking similarities with breastplates used in late medieval tournaments, in particular so-called Kolbenturnier. Indicated by a drawing in René d'Anjou's Livre des Tournois, here on the left, the cuirasses manufactured for this type of tournament were perforated, as in Paré's invention, to reduce weight and allow for ventilation. Still beyond orthopedic treatment, the French surgeon devised movable prostheses for arms and hands, seemingly inspired by scaled gauntlets and cuisses. And this is the drawing in Paré, and this is a contemporaneous prosthesis found in a grave in Germany. And this is another example, again Paré and another mechanized arm. In part mechanized, these apparatuses share the fascination of the 16th century with machines applied to the wearer both to recuperate and enhance human anatomy. Rectifying the posture, straightening the extremities, moderating the gait, and regularizing the gaze, as Piccolomini had stipulated, armor thus served as a medium to ethically discipline and anatomically standardize the ruler's body. Its microphysical and steady application of power sought to shape the body according to a humanist ideal, reaching into each and every bone and muscle fiber. Assembled to a ghostly garniture, the prehistory of orthopedics in armor is evoked by an illustration in the later editions of the Opera Chirurgica by Hieronymus Fabricius from 1647. Transformed into orthopedic automaton, the so-termed oplomochlion, clad into a, quote, chirurgical cuirass, end quote, incorporates all possible splints, corselets, and devices at once. the man-machine thus signals the apex of the ethical transformation of the body. In his essay, Gods in Uniform, from 1961, Ernst Kantorowicz endeavored to explore the cultural dynamics of picturing gods, kings, and emperors in military attire by evoking a theology of victory that attributed political achievement to the inherent virtue of the portrait. The armored ruler himself, as he pertains, was made into, quote, a living trophy, glorifying his perpetual prowess and moral excellence, end quote. In his seminal study, The King's Two Bodies, published in 1957, he had touched upon the motive when outlining the emergence of a Christological notion of kingship. Armor, accordingly, denoted a symbolical hub that, by doubling the portrait, divided the emperor's body and indicated his geminate nature, that is, being both a natural person and a mystic personification of his realm. The transformative power of armor, highlighted above, however, points to a different genealogy of political thought, aiming not at the visual apprehension of the audience, but instead at the wearer himself. It does not divide the body, but shapes it. It does not reduplicate the ruler into a mystic body, but bears on the natural body, which, being constantly contested, does not appear that natural after all. In contrast to a Platonic concept of representation, presupposing a dualism of body and image, in this reading, images actively emboss political and ethical precepts into the body itself. Intriguingly, too, it is the monarch, not his subjects, that is being disciplined. The ruler implements his moral and political regime not by prohibitive force, but by embodying that regime himself. Transmuted by his objects, he is rendered into an aesthetically enhanced exemplum that works on the audience less by external coercion or by appealing to rational deliberation, but by provoking a physical reenactment. This schematic effect both maintains and curtails his power. In other words, his transformation at the same time reveals a drive to personal power and the ethical confinement of the force required for its exercise. Thank you very much.